The Eastern Front of World War II was the largest and deadliest theatre of war in human history. Unlike any other front in the war, it was defined by its unprecedented scale and the sheer intensity and brutality of its combat. Prolonged, grueling battles under extreme conditions consumed millions of lives on each side. The nature of the conflict was distinctly brutal. Driven by ideological fervor, both Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union viewed this as a war of annihilation. This led to widespread atrocities against both soldiers and civilians, a level of savagery that wasn't common on other fronts. The numerous factors and events contributed to this level of brutality, and today we will talk about them to show you the true extent of horrors on this front. Ignited on June 22, 1941, with the launch of Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history, the Eastern Front immediately saw German forces achieving overwhelming success, decimating the Red Army with a combination of blitzkrieg tactics. Rapid advances of 3 million German soldiers supported by air power and armor instilled terror against soldiers and civilians, immediately showing the brutality of the German force. However, on this front, this was just a warm-up for what was to come. The scorched earth policy, first applied by the Soviets and then by the Germans when the tide of war turned against them, turned the vast areas into desolate wastelands. First, the Red Army, which was initially completely shattered by the German forces, carried out Stalin's directive during its retreat to destroy anything that could be of use to the enemy, including food, shelter, or resources. They burned crops, killed livestock, dismantled railways, and destroyed bridges and factories. Even entire towns were set ablaze to prevent them from providing shelter to the enemy. And when the tide of war turned against Germany and they were the ones retreating, they did the same thing. For the local population, the consequences were catastrophic. Civilians found themselves without food, shelter, or heating in the midst of one of the harshest winters on record, and deaths from starvation and exposure became rampant. Those who survived and found themselves in territories occupied by the Germans faced constant uncertainty. As the German army pressed forward, behind the front lines followed the notorious Einsatzgruppen. They were special mobile killing squads composed primarily of SS and police personnel, conducting mass shootings and pogroms against Jews, communists, and anyone deemed an enemy of the Reich. They were responsible for some of the worst and unspeakable acts that happened on the Eastern Front. However, amid this devastation and brutality, the resistance began to sprout. Partisan movements began to emerge across the occupied territories. These incredibly brave groups, often formed from remnants of Soviet military units and civilians, waged a guerrilla war behind German lines. They sabotaged railways, ambushed patrols, and coordinated with the Red Army to disrupt German supply lines. The partisans became a significant force, but their actions drew increasingly brutal reprisals from the occupiers against civilians, who suffered the most in every scenario. This only pushed more people to join the resistance, further enraging the occupier and escalating the cycle of violence. The clash of two extreme ideologies was responsible for the dehumanization of soldiers and civilians on both the German and Soviet sides. German propaganda described the Soviets as less than human and dirty animals, while Soviet propaganda framed their struggle as a noble defense of their homeland, encouraging everyone to fight hard against the evil, monstrous Germans. This created a complete lack of empathy between enemies, leading to the emergence of numerous atrocities. Cities were besieged and destroyed, civilians were starved and bombed, and prisoners of war were subjected to brutal conditions, with both sides showing little regard for the rules of war. The treatment of prisoners of war often forced soldiers on both sides to fight mercilessly to the end and save the last bullet or grenade for themselves. Those who surrendered usually experienced terrible fates. As the Germans viewed the Soviets as subhumans and livestock to be exterminated, a huge number of prisoners were shot or sent to various camps where they would work to death or be systematically executed. Sometimes they would simply be enclosed with barbed wire and machine gun towers in an open field and simply left to starve to death. The grass in the enclosed field and within arm's reach outside the wire was completely eaten, as the desperate prisoners tried to somehow preserve their lives, often unsuccessfully in the end. The Germans were especially shocked by the appearance of women in the role of soldiers and particularly enraged by that. The German High Command even ordered that women were not subjected to any form of POW rights and to be shot on the spot. In response, the situation on the Soviet side was equally grim. A German veteran recalled an incident where his friend, captured by Soviets positioned just a few hundred meters away, was used as an example of what awaited every captured German. The Soviets placed him in front of their trench and, using a loudspeaker, called German soldiers to watch. They began torturing him. His fellow soldiers, forced to watch helplessly, couldn't do anything until a sniper ended his friend's agony. He also managed to take out the female Soviet soldier who was conducting the torture. Many German prisoners were not released after the war's end, forced to labor in mines and factories. The last surviving ones were freed in 1955, a full decade after the war. Moreover, the notorious death marches of POWs in the harsh winter led to countless deaths from hypothermia, starvation, and exhaustion. Those who couldn't keep up were either shot immediately or left to freeze in the snow. Remember, casualties on the Eastern Front ran into the millions, tens of millions. The Eastern Front also saw the most horrifying and brutal urban battles in history, such as Stalingrad, Leningrad, and later Berlin. Brutal house-to-house, room-to-room, close-quarter battles were fought, with each structure becoming a fortified position to be attacked or defended fiercely. The battles were fought day and night, in all conditions, with enemies in the same rooms, spraying submachine guns and hand grenades against each other and finishing off with furious hand-to-hand combat. Soldiers on both sides faced extreme unbearable conditions beside enemy fire, dying en masse due to cold, hunger, and disease. A German soldier recalled that they had diarrhea so severe that there was no point in putting the clothes back on. Civilians trapped in these cities again suffered tremendously, and many were killed or wounded in the crossfire, bombardments, or starved to death. Outside the cities, on the open fields, equally horrific battles were fought as well. Enormous infantry and tank charges resulted in staggering losses. Among the tactics employed by the Soviet, one of the most desperate was the use of human wave attacks. These attacks involved large numbers of infantry, often poorly armed, sometimes even without any weapon, charging enemy positions in an attempt to overwhelm them through sheer numbers. Waves of soldiers, often without any tactical support, charged across the open field directly at machine gun nests and artillery, being cut down row by row, yet the attacks continued, wave after wave. Those who would stop or try to retreat were often shot by their own commanders. Even Germans were shocked by this tactic, with machine gunners going literally crazy because of what they did and saw. The Eastern Front also saw the biggest tank battles, such as the Battle of Kursk, which is cited as the largest tank battle ever. Thousands of tanks on both sides clashed in a wide-open terrain, trying to outflank and destroy each other. As the tide of World War II turned against the Axis powers, the relentless advance of Soviet forces marked the final chapters of the Eastern Front, pushing the Germans back to the very ground where the war had begun, now soaked with the blood of tens of millions. The Eastern Front ended as it had started, with horrific losses of life, reprisals, and retribution, primarily affecting the civilian population of Berlin and devastating the city in a brutal manner. In total, the Eastern Front claimed the lives of approximately 30 to 40 million people.